this is Tom Lynn, and momentarily we'll be speaking with the inimitable Benjamin Cail. We're keeping it candid here, keeping it informal. He's running and grabbing himself a beverage to keep himself quenched. And what we're going to talk about today is a few different things. Intelligence, artificial intelligence. Maybe get into some Martin Heidegger. We'll see here momentarily once Ben is back. While he's doing that, I'll check here, make certain everything is rolling. And it seems to be rolling. Yeah, we're cool. So, we're just going to keep it somewhat fluid, so it's not yet precise what direction the conversation will take. But I think a point of departure may be Nick Bostrom, who's got, well, here's Ben now. So, hey Ben, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you doing, Tom?
I'm rocking.
Yeah.
Rocking in the free world. Rocking in the free world. Woo! Anyway, as I was saying,
achieved truth and therefore are free from your fallenness, as Heidegger may say.
it's been Martin Heidegger, Party Marty, as he decidedly was not known. So he wasn't given to partying. But then again, who knows what he did in the forests of the Deutschland when he was out there in the cabin by himself. So,
That's one not so great thing he did.
but just to jump right in, maybe we're getting to Heidegger in a second, but I thought maybe a useful point of departure. Yesterday you posted a gloss, which I thought was insightful on Facebook. Nick Bostrom and one of his, I think he has more than one of his TED Talks. And I actually tried to track that down, and I was watching, I think I got caught watching another one than to which you were alluding, where he talks about the problem, or as he calls it, the problem of death, which is not, but the very fact that he sets it as a problem, I feel itself is problematical. But we can sort of bracket that for the moment, and let me ask you, were those the themes in Bostrom upon which you were picking up, or I believe you were actually coming out of another aspect of his work?
Yeah, the Bostrom transcript from the TED Talk that I read was really more about just the situation in artificial intelligence now and how it may advance in the coming 100 or so odd years, and problems that arise when artificial intelligence isn't really controlled by humans. And, looking into this research by Bostrom was more a result of a study that I saw earlier that day that said that I think within 40 years, 45% of human work will be able to be automated, and then within 120 years, all of human work will be able to be automated. This was based on conversations that and polling of machine learning experts. At the same time, the more that I reflect on this, I think that we're going to be in a situation where, yes, it's 100% possible to automate all human work, but I don't know that that will actually come about.
Yeah. We'll go. Were you going to say something else?
I think that the first example that we'll see of human work being automated is likely going to be with truckers and people who drive for a living, which is a huge segment of human work. And I think that'll be pretty devastating. It'll be incredibly socially disruptive as well as economically disruptive. And I wonder if that won't serve as kind of a wake-up call and a larger warning of, the social and economic dangers of artificial intelligence, which, actually plays into this idea of transhumanism, which Bostrom is a proponent of.
Yeah, I mean, there's And I'm not really deeply familiar with Bostrom's work, but I might try to track him down. Maybe we could have a little tete-a-tete, he and I. But it's interesting that you pick up on this theme of the automation of transportation, such as, with trucks, since there's so much discussion as to the advent of driverless vehicles, and you see some of that presently with Google and all the rest of it. And I would say for the most part, there's a kind of cautious optimism which attends that process. Now, here though, we may be arriving at the question of where is the control? Because if the driver is not controlling the car, then who is controlling the car? And, there's layers to what's happening here, all right? We're going to presume for the sake of argument that the technology works, right? So we're not going to become detained by issues of feasibility. We'll just say just say they figure all that out. And, well, then who is doing the direction? There's a program, but the program itself is not self-originating. It also connects to a broader network, right? So it's displaced and is situated in a framework which itself is also artificial. So the idea that we're no longer being subjected to human control only has a superficial veracity to it, because the frame to which we are giving ourselves away itself is also ordered by human agency. And then, of course, there's a reversal, because when you go back to the human agency, which is responsible for setting up a network like that, what is driving them? What are the imperatives which are inspiring the formulation of a network which would drive driverless cars? Now, all this is along a somewhat different trajectory than the one that you cited, though I think they relate ultimately. If you take this technology and you bracket all these concerns to which I've alluded and say that it's just implemented on a broad scale, then what you have is a displacement of people who are actually driving the vehicles and so forth. And this is what you're talking about, where the technological replacement of jobs creates economic disruption and potential crisis, which crisis, incidentally, could overturn the conditions of possibility for smooth technological progress, which is perhaps not an entirely trivial point. But to me, what is arresting about this possibility, which is not just an abstract possibility, this has already been happening for decades. For example, in the steel industry, where the introduction of automating and robotic technology dramatically reduced the need for human input. So you have a plant, say like outside of Baltimore, where in the beginning of 1980 or so, I can't remember the exact figure. I don't want to hazard it and then mix it up. But on a percentage basis, over the course of the ensuing decade, technology enabled that plant to cut its workforce to something like 33 to 25% of where it was in 1980, while maintaining a standard or expanded level of production, which, that creates massive job loss. It's said that the job losses goes to outsourcing, and that's part of it, but a lot of it has to do with technology. And so then there's this contradiction in the heart of economic organization that makes this a scandal, because isn't it potentially beneficial that human beings can be emancipated from unpleasant work? Why is it, I have my own thoughts, but why don't I turn it over to you and ask you about your musings on that matter?
Well, I referenced this just very briefly in the post that I put up, but I think that one of the real issues that comes about when people talk about technology and automation is that we talk about where we are now, technology wise, and then we talk about where we could be very far in the future technology-wise. And I think we completely ignore everything that's going to happen in the meantime. Not just in development of technology, but how that technology will affect our world. Because I think that a lot of the predictions that we see about, when Ray Kurzweil talks about 100 years in the future when humans will do no work and the government will provide everybody with a salary, I think that's, to a certain extent, a fairly pleasant image because there will be no work, there will be no class. It's just seen as this Marxist ideal in a way. But at the same time, leading up to that, we will still be in a world that's dictated by capitalism. And one fear that I really have about technology is as technology becomes the force which is doing a work, that technology is going to be in the hands of the financial capitalists, which will just further bring about the liberal system that we live in.
And I share your concern. I think maybe what needs to be worked out here is, can we really create this abstraction, this sort of vision of, with the implementation of certain technologies, whether that be in 100 or 200 or 50 years, you have a scenario in place where machines and computers can undertake at least the vast majority of the difficult jobs of metabolizing nature, as it were.
Yeah.
So then the human beings that remain ostensibly can give themselves over to leisure. Can we? But then that's the utopic endpoint, which is being used potentially to justify, in the meantime, the perpetuation of a fundamentally oppressive framework. Now, the thing is this framework actually capable of generating an approximation of this utopia? And I want to say no, because of the manner in which, or if it is capable of generating that utopia, what happens is that you have this outward serenity, but it's juxtaposed, and here I'm sort of following someone like Aldous Huxley, with a decimation of the quality of human mental and cultural existence. Because it seems that in order to get to this point where the machine universe can actually, quote unquote, service in this way, human beings as a whole have to subject themselves to a form of sociality which is derivative and degraded. Do you think that is a fair assessment on my part, or?
I would certainly say so that, humans in this utopic framework that, people like Ray Kurzweil and, Elon Musk describe, humans are subjects of technology rather than those who control technology. Much in the way that Heidegger discusses, humans subjecting themselves to the orderability of the standing reserve. I think we risk a lot when we think about a world where technology does all of the work. And I think that this is a fundamentally religious impulse. You brought up the idea of Nick Bostrom citing the problem of debt. I think a lot of people that look at technology as a way to get out of debt and to find this kind of utopia in the future, it's almost like, the Protestant minister who says there's going to be a rapture in however many years or something like that. And I think that we can look at technological ideas like uploading. I don't know if Bostrom talked about that in the discussion that you saw, but where you can actually transfer your brain to a computer chip of some sort, your self can live forever.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Not specifically from him, but I've heard other people discuss that notion, this idea. Here you have, first of all, I think it runs into serious technical difficulties. I don't actually think that that's feasible because that's not how consciousness works. It's a kind of scandal that our bare experience cannot be accommodated by the framework of neurology, which is being invoked to try and develop the capacity to upload or download our consciousness, or to separate our, here it is, they want to separate our subjectivity from from its corporeal aspect. And in this regard, you could say that they're simply, well, it's not just hypothetical. They're following in the footsteps of a Cartesian dualism, and this is where things get very tricky. Apart from whether or not it's, it gets down to like, what does it mean to be a human being? Being human, does that not entail a certain relationship with our own body? And if you remove that from the equation, then what remains? What are we? And how?
Being human is certainly attached to the idea of being human within our own physical body. And I think that what happens is that people who are into this idea of casting aside the body view it as a hindrance and fail to see the fact that humanity isn't just contained in the mind, or contained in some sort of consciousness that they claim could be downloaded into a computer, but we experience the world through our body, right? And if you look at this, and so one idea of uploading is that our mind will be on a computer chip, which will be inserted into some prosthetic or mechanical body. Then we're completely subjugated by this technology. I mean, even if we control it, we fundamentally connected ourselves into a technological construct that is more destructive than anything we have now. I mean, you can point to things like Facebook, Instagram, stuff like that as a way that we falsely relate to our world, but it's nowhere near what it would be like if we essentially turn into these kind of cybernetic beings.
Well, in fact, it almost seems like the possibility of the social would be negated by enclosure within a digital form that could simply move through a database. How would then interaction be realized, right? Or what is it? Is it one person's code becomes spliced into another person's code? And who knows where the imagination would take it? It seems like an utterly mechanical affair, and to me, the bottom line is experience. Like, what is the experiential ground upon which such a project is founded? And I don't believe that it's actually there. You might be able to take information and code information, mere data, but that is not what it is to exist, to be.
It's like modifying the human and the human experience as merely a form of information in a world where information is the only thing that's really valued or exists, right?
Right. Now, and so it just seems to me, anyway, and I think you're sympathetic with the utopic endpoint is actually ultimately incoherent. For one thing, if it's really trying to draw us to a space of immortality, it seems that the means which are being proffered to bring us to that point will ultimately destroy what is most quintessential, namely our encounter with the world itself. But even abstracting from the incoherence of the endpoint, the avenues to be traveled to get to that endpoint seem to involve, ironically, profound human subjugation and then dismissal and degradation. To return back to the problem of how technology produces job loss under the current regime, if you have this massive displacement of people from their jobs, that means in effect is that they lose the means to live, you know. So it's a situation which leads to the degradation, if not outright a destruction of huge swaths of the human population. And it ties back to the manner in which we have placed the commodity logic at the forefront. And I mean, it's actually pretty obvious to see. But even like when I stated, well, they lose the means, what you're saying is that, oh, they don't have the money. If they don't have the money, they don't have the food. But that doesn't mean there isn't food and that there isn't shelter, because obviously there are those things. But hey, so Mark, so good. So come on. But that the access to these human necessities is mediated by participation in a framework which is fundamentally coercive and which actually underwrites the problem of class divide.
Right.
So now here's the question, right? Is class integral to human society? Is it reasonable for us to ask whether a classless society is possible? And if it is possible, then what is how does one, if presuming that's a desirable outcome, how does one get to that point without being tyrannized by these problems that we've talked about on the other side of the equation, like with the commodity logic and all that? What are your thoughts there, or where do you think one might look?
See a world where it's owned by the collective. I see more of a world where it's owned by the elites. If you look at it, those degenerates Titans in Silicon Valley, like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook ads, or the guys at Google. And I think that
Now, what you're raising there is a crucial point, that the technological infrastructure that we're discussing, this requires a certain level of knowledge and skill, which is only going to be accessible, at least under the current state of affairs, by a narrow segment of the population. And even if you abstract from the issue of standard models of ownership and so forth, the mere control of information then becomes the linchpin in class divide. So by fetishizing and insisting on the advancement of the technology, the technological, one might argue that you have introduced an alternative avenue to guarantee the perpetuation of class divide, even if we succeed in extricating ourselves from traditional means whereby that divide is established. I want to go back and define what I mean by class. What I mean by class is, or a class society is one in which one segment of the population establishes dominance over the other to its own self-interest and against the self-interest of the dominated class. It's basically a situation of radical power disequilibrium, which will favor one group of individuals over another, and which I feel is incommensurate with healthy human relationship.
Yeah.
Now, I do believe that such a world is possible, and one sees glimmers of that world even within our own.
This world, you mean?
What?
You said such a world is possible, meaning a classless world?
Yes, I believe it is possible to come to a society where power is no longer distributed in such a way as to create imbalances, so that one group of people have radical privilege, whether that be informationally, materialistically, culturally, etc. And I believe that world is possible because of my conception of what the human being, what it is to be human, right? So some people might offer an alternative anthropology and an alternative account of what does it mean to be human and to exist in a society. So I just wanted to add at least an approach to a definition by way of clarification. But I'm really intrigued by what you've suggested in terms of how the control of information itself, almost more than conventional property relations, then becomes the real linchpin. And so education, which itself is kind of a muddy and difficult word, emerges as crucial in terms of where are we going from here. The transmission of culture. So, I'm just thinking where to go from there, in terms of trying to arrive at a concrete possibility of recommendation. But do you have any thoughts at this junction on that point?
I mean, just going back to the idea of information, I think it's important to remember that information itself has no meaning, right? I mean, we give meaning to information, and when people have control over information, are the generators of information or the keepers of information, they are the ones that, prescribe a meaning to it. So I think that's a way that social control could be exerted.
And how do you think it's possible to challenge the manner in which that control is presently being exercised so that a more beneficial state of affairs can be attained?
I don't know that there is a way to challenge it directly. I mean, I haven't thought about this much. I'm not really sure how I would go about challenging it. I mean, you could take kind of... I would not do this, but I suppose that one could put forth the idea of taking kind of a neo-Luddite approach and completely eschewing technology. I mean, I don't think that's the way to go about it, but that's just one approach that could be taken. What would you say?
Well, I also agree that taking a kind of radically primitivist or sort of neo-Luddite tact is also a bit of a misstep. And the thing is that I don't believe it's possible to relate with the world technologically. I think is part of what it is to be a human being. The
Like,
thing
well,
the thing is that we have to exhibit extraordinary discipline in terms of the form whereby that aspect of the human presents itself. Now, what this means is we have to alternate our relationship with it. To come back to the question of challenging the fashion in which social control is presently being exercised vis-a-vis information and information distribution and management, my response would be one of, it may sound kind of hokey, but one of radical personal responsibility in everyday conversation. So that means taking responsibility for what one holds and how one holds it, and also holding to account, and sometimes where it's difficult, other people who might be exhibiting a certain either a lack of discipline and how they're presenting and engaging with things, or it could be not that they lack discipline, but that they are in their offerings, someone like Daniel Dennett, for example, prescribing a vision of the human person, which in my view is ethically a monstrosity. And so where I'm offering is that we have to ground the process in moral sensibility, which entails taking things like freedom and agency and consciousness possible on the part of all individuals. And if you just treat the human person reductively, even in an implicit way, such as when we place the locus of agency in a machine or a system rather than in the person, you create a linguistic atmosphere which can translate into their bondage. And a mechanical bondage, which ironically is actually without a fixed endpoint. We tend to imagine that a world that was given over to the manipulation of artificial sensibility would at least be a stable world. But I would offer that, in fact, the absolute contrary would be the case, because those sorts of frameworks are only mechanically responsive to the universe, to reality itself, and so are incapable of responding meaningfully to the manner in which history itself unfolds. So it would actually, the non-responsiveness of the mechanical actually translates into disorder, paradoxically. So the solution is to always subordinate the mechanical to that which is conscientious, which is purposeful, and that which is open to the real as it unfolds in the moment. That would be my first blush effort as a response to your question. Which, of course, I'm putting it in very general terms, right? So
yeah.
it would be useful to try and lend something concrete to what I'm recommending. So an example might be, off the top of my head, I think a useful example would be our relationship with agriculture, where technology has actually led and created serious difficulties due to things like monoculture and all the rest of it. And part of that has to do with the subjection of the agricultural field to the logic of capital. But where I'm driving at is that the manner in which actually relate with the earth to produce food demands a sensitivity and a living relationship with the earth that simply cannot be attained if we are using only mechanistic tactics. And I'm further offering that this can only be accomplished through the human beings, and it also demands a transformation of the scale at which things are executed, meaning that food needs to be produced on a essentially local basis, because it is only on a local basis that an appropriate ecologically sound state of affairs can be implemented. Beyond a relatively basic scale within the context of current operations, the machine approach to agriculture leads to a conflict with the manner in which biology itself actually operates, the manner in which plants and the earth actually interface in ecosystems. That simply is incommensurate both with the health of the earth and with human beings themselves. So, that means we have to actually get our hands dirty in order to feed ourselves. And this is not to, do away with the technological and say we have to, scrap all our tractors and things like that. It's to realize that we are part of the equation, and that we have to pay attention to how we're part of that equation on a relatively nitty-gritty scale. So that's just an example off the top of my head. There are other examples, like for blah 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 blah. I'm going off here. Just to give one more example of where the human, and this is actually a better example, where the human really needs to trump the technological, is in education itself. Instead of relying on machines and computers, and increasingly and things like standardized testing, and increasingly the discourse in systems of education, which I encounter, want to expand reliance on those avenues and on so-called, STEM programs, which is related but distinct. What you're doing is you're undermining the process of pedagogy. You're undermining the relationship between the teacher and the student, and in the process displacing the role of the human being itself, himself or herself, from the very trajectory of learning and the development of culture. So that would be another domain in which greater discipline needs to be exercised on the part of all, not to submit themselves before the allure of the technological.
Yeah, I think the idea of education as a means where we interact with technology, especially through, as you mentioned, standardized testing, is really interesting, because I think that it creates this framework where, value judgments are created based on the fields that you go into and your success on things such as the, SAT, ACT, and graduate exams, things like that. So you become a vessel in which knowledge isn't really valued, but expertise at, taking a test or something like that becomes more important.
And you know what, I'm realizing, because where I am...
Oh, I can't hear you, Tom.
Oh, sorry, I had
Oh, no.
muted myself. But I'm realizing, because they're closing where I am in a moment, that we'll have to wrap it up here.
Awaken.
Yes. We don't have to jump right off, but maybe initial sort of, I think a specific topic or area is one where these issues come to light are in classics, which is something in which you have great interest. So maybe you could offer some thoughts on the tension between the value and power of classical education, Latin, Greek, language, and culture, and the recommendations of contemporary trajectories and how you feel yourself. Where do you see yourself in relationship with that tension?
Yeah, so when somebody asks me what classics is, I just give a kind of short, canned answer, which is, classics is the study of, the language, literature, art, and culture of the Greek and Roman worlds. But I think a broader way to look at classics, and especially in the modern world, a more relevant way of looking at classics is we look at how humans relate to the world through two societies, but then those ideas can be applied even to the modern world as it exists today. Now, what happens though is in a world that's increasingly putting a premium on fields like STEM, where technology is being developed and where that is, that's kind of where profit centers are developing now in Silicon Valley and stuff like that. Um, the value of classics is brought down and down and down, not because it's seen as a soft field of study, and it's not, I would argue, although I'm sure people would disagree with me, that of the humanities makers, classics is the most hardcore. But when you devalue humanities education and when you devalue things like classics, you devalue a study of what it means to be human, right? So we aren't able to relate to ourselves through a critical lens as we once were. When everything's reduced to technology and science, it kind of takes away some of the mystery of the world, right? It's this idea of if you're in a garage and you're looking for something and you shine a flashlight somewhere, you're only seeing that. And then if you shine the flashlight somewhere else, you lose sight of what you previously saw. So when you focus on only one area and kind of negate other areas of study that are more closely related to what it means to be human, what the human experience really is, I think we really lose a way of looking at ourselves. Now, that's not to say that STEM education isn't important. I would say that because of the state of the world that we're in, STEM is critical, but you can't take STEM apart from everything else. What happens more and more is when people put a premium on STEM education, they at the same time, take away from humanities. So I think one of the dangerous things that happens is people don't seem to be able to value both differently.
Right.
People seem to only value one.
End up with an impoverishment of our understanding of what it is to be a human being.
Right.
Kind of like a gross way this shows up in everyday ways of speaking is there's this casual notion that people are right brain or left brain. Like, oh, they're interested in the humanities or they're interested in the sciences, and you're one or the other. And this division is fundamentally deleterious because not only both because it's inaccurate. The two modes, if you like, which are posited as distinct by that ordinary way of speaking, are actually intimately connected. But it also ultimately has led to a devaluation of the humanities as well. And in fact, this would draw us all the way back. I'm almost cherry to bring this up because my relationship with Heidegger is not one which evaluates him in an entirely positive light. to put it gently, right? I'm more Husserlian in my tact, but the Heideggerian notion of how truth discloses itself to us, the truth as that which is unfolded or uncovered or disclosed, as opposed to truth is something which is verifiable. There's two different approaches to the truth, and the one which is privileged by our society is the latter, where it's something which is manipulable and factitious. Facticity, right? The facticity is given hegemonic weight but this leads to an incredibly truncated sense of the world.
Now, this thing part of Heidegger's idea of proof and proof as kind of a means of revealing the world from oneself is also an idea of instinctive, right? Which is kind of what I was trying to get at with that whole flashlight thing, although I don't know how clear I was.
No, that's the connection is evident. Yeah, there's an interplay of the hidden and the seen. The seen and the unseen are intimately connected. And so look, you could just, you pick up a cube, you can look at one side of the cube to, take in that aspect. You have to lose the rest of it. It's so that perspectival dimension to how truth arises is carries significant implications. But perhaps we will leave it there for the moment, Ben, just because we've got press of time. But it's also maybe where we could take it up. We'll do another chat here in a few days, and we can take it up from there. So, do you want to offer any closing thoughts?
I would just say that I think it's important that people think more about these ideas of technology. I don't think people think about it as much as they like to think they do. When you interact with technology over Facebook or Twitter, something like that, it's just become such a part of our lives that we don't really think about it anymore. If I were to encourage people to do one thing, I would encourage them just to try to be more thoughtful in their use of technology and think about when they're using things like Twitter
Yes, and I would, mindfulness, awareness, be more conscientious. I'd really second your exhortations, Ben. So I think we'll leave it there for now. So, thank you so much, Ben, for talking with me.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
And we'll get this up here in a little while. And thank you guys all for listening. And we'll catch you on the flip. All right. Bye-bye.